Again, welcome to continuation of our discussion regarding fire safety code. And this is again to remind everybody, part and parcel of multidisciplinary engineering area wherein architect, civil engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, and electronics engineer are having professional practice and involvement. In the Philippines, also we have an organization that caters in this specific field, and we are actually an established organization, and we are welcome to accept new and new members, because in our country, this is on a nascent stage yet. We are still coping up with the advanced countries' code and standards, so we are on the right track. But still, we are new, and in some countries, this area is already a subset engineering discipline, which is a specialized one called fire protection engineering. So in fire safety code, we have to discuss several chapters, one chapter up to chapter 1 to chapter 43 in particular, with several or about 4 annexes. So let us proceed to chapter 1. It is about the administration of the code of this fire safety area. Okay? So, chapter 1, we have 1.1 brings us the scope. Okay? The following is suggested procedure for determining the code requirements for building structure. So this detailed scope. Okay? Number 1, determine the occupancy classification by referring to occupancy definition in chapter 6. So type of occupancy, that is chapter 6. So we need first, okay, to be able to determine what type of occupancy does the structure belongs. Okay? So we'll take note of about 3 in this course. So 1 and 2, family dwellings, apartments, and healthcare facilities. Okay? And number 2, determine if the building or structure is new or existing. So as we had discussed in the table of contents, this code has respectively new and existing chapters per specific area of application. That is what? That is defined in chapter 6. Okay? So, we need to know that there are related, actually corresponding sections for new and existing. Okay? And number 3, determine the hazard contents. Okay? And determine the occupant load. So that's why the occupant load factor is very important, because the occupant load is very important to be able to classify what factors we have to use in designing a system. Okay? Okay? So, occupancy classification, there are several categories. Then, new or existing, then occupant load. So, very important for engineering, but we have what? Preparatory important determination to be made. Okay? Number 4, determine hazard contents. Okay? Now, another step. Next is refer to applicable occupancy chapter. So after determination of 1 to 4, we are now ready to go to a specific chapter that guides the application in that specific area. So that is from chapter to 12 to 42. Okay? Therefore, chapter 1 to 11 are those chapters that are general in nature. That's why we have to discuss 1 to 4 and 5 to 7. And some other important topics in chapter 8 to 11. Okay? Chapters 1 to 4 and chapter 6 to 11 as needed. Okay? Whenever needed, whenever necessary. That is what? For general information only. Okay? And number 6, determine the occupancy, subclassification, subclass, or special use conditions that are involved. If there are any, now you are now under the specific chapters. You can find out the subclassification there, if there are any. And step number 7, proceed through the applicable occupancy chapters to verify compliance with its reference sections. Okay? We have to what? Determine the compliance. Okay? How much is the compliance? So those are not complied with should be adjusted and made necessary compliance procedure. Okay? And that means in step number 7, we are now able to assess the application if how we can comply the code. We are now having the idea, okay? And the next step, where 2 or more requirements apply, refer to the occupancy chapter, okay? Which generally takes precedence over the base chapters 1 to 4 and chapters 6 to 11, okay? That is how it is prioritized, okay? For example, there are conflicting or confusing provisions in several sections. Then you have to go back to occupancy chapter. What is occupancy chapter? Wherein we determine the type of occupancy. That is step 1 in this step. So look back at step 1. Determine the occupancy classification. So look back at that. Okay? And that is in chapter 6. Okay? Okay? That is the priority. Where 2 or more occupancy chapters apply, such as in mixed occupancy, apply the most restrictive requirements. So, if you have 2 weights to consider, you are most influenced by the heavier one. So that is what we mean by this. So the heavier one must take precedence. Huh? Apply the heavier one. Because if you apply this one, you are safe with the lighter one. So the lighter provision is included in the heavier one. So you are safe if you comply with the heavier provision. Okay? So example. So example in order to guide us how to proceed with this code. There is an example, okay? We have example here wherein we have to determine the code requirements for a jewelry store. Jewelry store is not the same with any other store. It is an specialized type of store, commercial establishment. No? Jewelry retail sales operations occupying all of the 12th floor of a certain building, multi-tenant, meaning there are several different other type of businesses in other floors. However, the jewelry store occupies all of the, or 95% of the floor on the 12th floor, okay? For sales purposes, based on occupancy classification criteria and definitions found in sections. Occupancy determine the first step, determine occupancy classification. You have to go to chapter 6 and section 611. The jewelry store should be classified as a mercantile occupancy. Okay? In determining that the floor is a mercantile occupancy, the code user narrows the range of choice of applicable occupancy chapters from chapters 12 to 42. Okay? Okay? Okay, so after that, we are now going to 12 to 42 because we already know the type of occupancy, mercantile occupancies. Chapter 36 and 37 of that 12 to 42. Instead of the bulk of chapter 12 to 42, very long document, we are now narrowing to chapters 36 and 37. What is chapter 36 and 37? Let's go back. Okay? That is mercantile occupancy, chapter 36 and 37. And 36 is for new, while 37 is for existing. Okay? So, based on the definition of existing building found in chapter 3, the user can determine whether the building is subject to requirements for new construction or for existing buildings. Okay? So we have to decide. That is step 2. We have to decide if the jewelry store used in this example was occupied subsequent to adoption of the code. Okay? Meaning, 2018, subsequent to that, okay, currently being enforced, the user determines that the life safety features required are those that apply to new construction. That is how we decide if the building is new or not. It is reference to the adoption of the code. Okay? The code is 2018. We are discussing 2018 code. And because of that, if the jewelry store used was occupied, okay, occupied, meaning the government authorities issued occupancy permit. So the date of occupancy permit is there. So take note, you have to compare the date of occupancy permit and your code year of adoption. Okay? The user determines the life safety features. So it is either new or existing. Okay. So, for example, the jewelry store was occupied 2015 or 2010, year 2010. Oh, that is already existing mercantile occupancy. Existing mercantile occupancy. If that jewelry store received occupancy permit year 2020, and therefore that is considered as new mercantile occupancy. Okay, that is step 2. And then, next, the code, therefore, this code user next identifies the subclassification of the mercantile occupancy. Okay? What is the subclass? Okay. We already know that is mercantile occupancy. But what is the subclass? And because for example, this jewelry store is new, so we have to use chapter 36 if the jewelry store is new. There is no date in the example. There's no date in the example, so we have to assume that is new. So chapter 36 and subclassification A, B, C on the basis of what? Area. 5,000 square feet or 465 square meters floor area used for sales purposes. Okay? So, because the jewelry store occupies more than 3,000. Okay? More than 3,000 kasi the jewelry store occupies what? The given is 465 square meter being occupied by the jewelry store. This is equivalent to 95% of the floor area for sales purposes. And because of that, in the chapter 36, since the code states that if the mercantile application is more than 280 square meter, but not more than 30,000 square feet or 2,800 square meters, so 280 square meter to 2,800 square meters. So that range of area, it is classified as a Class B mercantile occupancy. Okay? That is classified as Class B. So we already know 3 parameters. Okay? We already know 3 criterias. The user then locates the requirements of Chapter 36 that specifically apply to Class B mercantile occupancy. And those requirements that apply across all classification of mercantile occupancies. Okay? So we are very much guided specifically, okay, to look at that. So, for example, we have what? Take note of Exhibit 1.1 on your right-hand area. So we have what? Core chapters. What are the core chapters? Chapter 1 to 10. And chapter 11, high-rise building. Okay? And the specific application chapters are chapters 12 to 42. Okay. So in this example, we have to be compliant with chapter 1 to 10. And because of that, jewelry store is located at 12 floors. The 12 floors of the building, so high-rise building. So we are required to be compliant for the provision of chapter 11 also. So we are chapter 1 to 11. And since this is a mercantile occupancy of new categories, chapter 36 is to be complied with. So this list of chapters gives us the requirements and the criteria in order for us to develop the design of the fire safety facilities of the building, of the business. Okay? And what's next? The user notes that chapter 36 does not repeat the requirements found in chapters 1 to 4 and chapters 6 to 10. Does not repeat. Okay? Chapter 1 to 4 and 6 to 10. Okay? So, what is chapter 5? it is being messed up, missed in this document. What is chapter 5? So let us go back. What is chapter 5? 36, 28. Okay, chapter 5 is performance-based, a different area, wherein we do not use the specific chapters for design. We have our own suggested or proposed design to be approved by the government authorities. That is what we mean by performance-based option. But our proposed must be based also in scientific findings, not just wild guess, okay? Not just wild ideas, okay? So that is chapter 5. That's why it is being left out in many cases of the discussion within the code, okay? So let us go back. So let us go back to the example here. So chapter 1 to 4 and 6 to 11 or 6 to 10. Because code mandatorily references the use of those chapters. So mandatory, chapter 1 to 4, 6 to 10. Okay? Because the jewelry store is located in the high-rise portion of the building, that's why it must be compliant with the chapter 11. So I already mentioned that. In this example, the code user recognizes that the requirements of chapter 1 to 4, chapter 6 to 10, a portion of chapter 11, and chapter 36 apply. So we need only a portion of chapter 11 and chapter 36. We don't need all of those chapters. While chapter 1 to 4 and 6 to 10, we need all of the chapter, all of the sections. We need all. Section of 11 and 36 only, specific to the application. So that's how we deal with this code. Another example will give us a different application wherein the code requires the compliance of a mall structure. Mall structure. We are now using the new terminology. Rather than mall building, we are using mall structure. Okay? Consider a two-story mall structure where two tenants spaces formerly occupied by shoe store, okay? Two-story shoe store and children's clothing store, each with 465 square meters. Okay? So what is the threshold? 280 square meters, no? For class B. Okay? So, of floor area for sales purposes are to be gutted, combined in area, and outfitted for a new tenant that will sell sporting goods. Okay. This is a mall wherein some area is renovated, have to be renovated. The new tenant will occupy both of the shoe store and children's clothing areas, which totals 929 square meters of floor area for sales purposes. The code user first identifies that the rehabilitation work will require compliance with the provisions of Chapter 43. That is specifically for renovation, okay? Rehabilitation work. So you will change the application of the area, and then you are going to comply with a different set of criteria. Okay? And that such work falls into rehabilitation category of modification, as explained. So modification. So there are several types under building rehabilitation. So one of which is modification. Okay? The user also notes that the occupancy involved is mercantile. So mercantile because it is a sales business. Next, the code user consults the mercantile occupancy Okay? Sub-classification criteria, the previous tenants would both Class B mercantile occupancy, Class B, but you combined it for a single purpose. What will happen? The new tenant that will occupy the combined space for the previous tenants will be Class B occupancy. The modification does not involve a change in mercantile subclassification. So the provisions of sections 36.1.1.6 and 37.1.1.6 do not mandate compliance with the requirements for new construction. Okay? So existing construction lang. Existing na to. So chapter 37 tayo. Okay? Because we did not change the Class B subclassification category. Okay? Chapter 43 is consulted to learn whether Chapter 36 for new mercantile occupancies or Chapter 37 for existing mercantile occupancies is to be used. Okay, let us go further on Chapter 43. The rehabilitation to be performed must be classified as repair, renovation, modification, or reconstruction work. The reconfiguration of the space leads to classifying the work as modification. So, what are the involved rehabilitation? Repair, renovation, modification, reconstruction. In this case, this is only modification from previous owners, previous tenants to the current tenant. Okay? So that's why it is under the modification requirements of the applicable section of the code. Existing. Thus, the provision of Chapter 37 for existing mercantile occupancies are required as the base requirement for starting the rehabilitation of the tenant space. Okay, per the section of 43.5.1.3, newly constructed elements, components, and system must comply with the requirements of other sections of the code applicable to new constructions. Therefore, portions of Chapter 36 for new mercantile occupancies also will apply. If you utilize elements, components, and systems as new or as addition, di ba? You added new components. So, some provision, specific section of Chapter 36 will also apply. Okay? Okay, that is how it is very hard to comply with this. We need really an expert, a practitioner in this area. Okay? Take note, we are under existing occupancy, mercantile occupancy, Chapter 37, and yet you have to read back Chapter 36 for new. For if there are some additional new components involved. Okay? In example 2, the code user recognizes that requirements of Chapters 1 to 4, Chapter 6 to 10, some portion of Chapters 36, 37, and some portion of Chapter 43 apply and are required to meet this section. So, let us go to this exhibit. So, we have core chapters. So, these are the chapters involving the current application of mall tenant. Okay? Which lists what? 929 square meters of occupancy, which is again Class B because it is within what? 280 square meter up to 2,800 square meters. So that one is what? For Class B sub-classification of occupancy. Okay, so these are the chapters and provisions of the code pertaining to that. So let us go further And just finish this page before we can call it a day and just return back later on. So, meaning, the delta, meaning there are deletions. So, title, NFPA101, Life Safety Code shall be known as Life Safety Code, is cited as such and shall be referred to herein as this code or the code. Okay? And Section 1.1.2, danger to life from fire. The code addresses those construction, protection, and occupancy features necessary to minimize danger to life from the effects of fire, including smoke, heat, and toxic gas created during fire. Much of the death, most of the fatalities during fire incidents are caused by toxic gases. Very few are caused by fire. It is caused by smoke and toxic gases. Okay? So, those are included. Effects of fire, including smoke, heat, and toxic gases. So, there are four. Fire, smoke, heat, toxic gases. Okay? Okay? Danger to life from fire. So, let us design our establishment, our areas for safety, targeting, countering this menace to our life. As an engineer, we have to design those rooms, spaces. Okay? So, some historical background. The title of the code was changed from Building Exit Code to Code for Safety for Life, from Fire in Building and Structure in 1966. As far as 1966, the change in title expanded the scope of the code from a specification-based code. This is a specification-based code for stairs, doors, and fire escapes to performance in specification-based code. Performance and so it includes performance. What is performance? Chapter 5. Okay? And addresses the myriad factors that affect life, safety, and the event of fire. Okay? From 1966 to 2002, the code was referred to by its shortened name, Life Safety Code. And from that on, the code was officially renamed Life Safety Code. The change in the title reflects the code's ever-changing content. In some cases, the code addresses the non-fire day-to-day building occupancy use issues. For example, in sections in Chapter 12 and Chapter 13, which apply to assembly occupancy, access and egress routes are required to be maintained so that crowd management, security, and emergency medical personnel are able to reach those individuals that are trapped or at any time without undue hindrance. So it can easily access and help those persons in dire straits. Okay, and that is just for now. And thank you very much for listening. We will come back for the next discussion, the next section. And again, this is your Zamurai Engineer at your service.